Department of Geography, 2013 to 2014. Department of Geography, Shivaji University, Kolhapur, 2010 to 2013. And the Department of Applied Geography, Ravensa University, Cuttack. Dr. Pathak did his PhD in Population Studies from the International Institute of Population Sciences, Mumbai in 2016. He also completed MPhil in Population Studies from IIPS, Mumbai. He did his Master's in Geography degree from Department of Geography, BHU, Varanasi. Thus, he is alumni of our university too. He has completed Bachelor's of Arts degree in Geography, English Literature and Education from the Even Christian College, University of Allahabad. His current research focuses on the social networks and demographic behaviors, geospatial analysis of population health, environmental exposure, and development issues using large-scale survey data sets. He was PRB Policy Communication Fellow during 2013-2014, Washington, D.C., USA, and prestigious Young Scientist Summer Program, IIASA, Luxembourg, Vienna, during June to August 2013. Besides, he has been visiting scholar at Vienna Institute of Demography, Vienna, Austria, 2014, Harvard Center of Population and Development Studies, 2019, Harvard University Initiative in Population Research, IPR, Ohio State University, Columbus, Ohio, USA, 2019. He has published research articles in several peer-reviewed journals, including Social Science and Medicine, Health and Place, European Journals of Clinical Nutrition, American Journal of Agriculture, Economics, etc. Today, he will deliver a lecture on determinants and consequences of fertility transition. So I request to Dr. Aditya to coordinate the functioning of the lecture, and I request to Professor Pathak to please deliver the lecture. Professor Pathak, please.
Thank you so much, sir. Professor V.N. Sharma sahab, बहुत धन्यवाद. Thank you so much. So before coming to the topic of today's talk, I will just take 1 minute to say a few words because I have been a student of Department of Geography, Banaras Hindu University, and I consider myself very lucky that from 2004 and 2006 I was doing my post graduation. And I remember when we were there as a master students, I think our was the first batch. I want to also thank, I can see Professor Srabani Sanyal ma'am is there, who has taught me. And I'm sure the other faculty members would be joining here soon. So I remember thoroughly my 2 years most productive as a young student when you are 20 from after completing your graduation. I think that was the time when you were very raw. And I really thank Banaras Hindu University and particularly Department of Geography and all my teachers during such a formative years, the kind of training, exposure, faith, belief, guidance, and support that I received from the faculty members of the Department of Geography. Whatever I am today, a lot of role goes to my teachers, and I always bow my head for the respect that I have to all my teachers at Department of Geography, Banaras Hindu University. Whenever I get a chance, if for any reason, I always look for some opportunity to somehow connect with my alma mater. So I want to thank all my teachers, and I really consider all the students who are today joining for this session. I can tell them that you are at the very right place where you have bestowed with an excellent teachers, and you have a very bright future before all of you. So thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Aditya, Professor Sharma Saab, and Professor Srabani Sanyal ma'am. I remember your lectures like I was attending your class even yesterday. So you have been an inspiration, and I've tried to pick up few things when I discuss my class. So thank you so much, ma'am, for all your training and for all your support. So with that, I will now switch back to my today's talk. And I'm going to talk about some of the you know possible factors that influence fertility levels, and largely about that, and some of the possible consequences that fertility transitions have. And we will also briefly touch upon some of the work that we have done in some part in Jaunpur district in Uttar Pradesh. So, thinking about fertility transition, why we should, I mean, what is the need for this topic? So, as we all know that the demographic composition of any population is a critical input when it comes for planning and development planning for any area or any region, because the basic input is, you have to think about different population sizes, its distribution, its composition, depending upon age, depending upon sex, depending upon education, depending upon occupational patterns. So you need all these numbers, whether you are planning for a city development, you're talking about rural development. So therefore, we all care about population, not only population size and distribution, but at the same time, we also care about, the composition and internal heterogeneity in the population size also. So if you think about, if you have to understand that how population size of any region or any area is changing over the period of time, we all know as a student of geography that, there are principal three factors which are governing population size. One is, of course, mortality level of any society. Second is fertility level of any society. And third one is migration. With regard to mortality changes and fertility transition, these are processes which take relatively longer period of time. So therefore, if you have to think about, how these factors are going to operate and bring about change in the size of population, its composition, so that will require a longer period of observation through empirical data. On the other hand, if you think about migration, so we know that migration can bring about dramatic changes in population sizes and its distribution in a very relatively smaller time period. So all of them, these three important processes are principal process that govern population size, composition, and its distribution of any region, right? Now, today I'm going to take larger time to think about fertility transition. Now, if you think about the typical demographic transition model, so we know that in a pre-industrial society, or we can say agricultural society, or society which is relatively material-wise less advanced, they tend to have higher level of mortality. So what does that mean? That means that if you go back, 2-3 generations back, our grandparents or our great grandparents, then typically, on an average, the life expectancy, which, as you all know, is for example, if you talk about life expectancy at birth, is the average number of years that population is expected to live, right? So for the longer time of human history, our life expectancy has remained fairly low, largely around 25, 30, or 35 years. So which meant that if you want to have, if suppose a couple or an individual wants to have about 3 or 4 as a, preferred family size, they would have to produce, maybe 7 or 8, because of relatively higher mortality level in those society. So, and this has been true in the case of Western societies, and likewise it has been true in case of most of the developing societies. So with the higher relative mortality levels, the fertility, so society were put under pressures so that, humanity survive, human race survive and thrive. So there were pressures which were social pressures which were generated from within society, so that, as soon as a couple used to get married, across culture, across religions, we have this blessings for the newly met couples to, marry and to multiply and fruitful. So these sort of things are there across cultures, typically things coming from, historical time periods wherein, due to relatively higher mortality levels, where life expectancy used to be pretty low as compared to today's standard. And so therefore the society was creating, different cultural norms, traditions, and customs, wherein, people were actually motivated to keep fertility levels relatively higher as compared to mortality, so that, the population remains, humanity survives. So therefore, if you look at maybe 80% of human history and demographic changes, we observe that population number were very, very small. If you go through various demographic studies and literature, you would know that population numbers never increased drastically. And then what happened that as with improvement in the way human society was living, most of us was hunter and gatherer society in historical time periods. And with advent of with as progress happened and we moved towards more stabilized sort of living in terms of through advent of agriculture, and we became a more social group, I mean social beings, to say that, because before advent of agriculture, most of us were like societies which were not, there was no permanency in life. So with agriculture coming in, people started living together and started having stable means of food supplies. So gradually, what happened that if you think about how can we bring down mortality, so there are some basic and very simple changes that took place and which have been recorded in human history that has led to tremendous decline in mortality levels. So for example, with if you think about Renaissance period or Industrial Revolution, so what happened that with these changes happened in the European context, the material life circumstances of society started to change, right? So with improvement in the housing condition in Europe, people started to have basic facility, for example, continuous supply of amenable drinking water, safe sanitation facility. People also understood the idea of you should always wash your hands with soap whenever you go for lunch, breakfast, or dinner. So these were very basic things that happened, and of course with good living conditions, with regular food supply, that led to huge drop in mortality levels, which was first experienced in the Western context. And what happened for some time period of time, maybe for the 50 years, 60 years, or 100 years, when these so-called higher fertility with mortality decline, whenever mortality starts to decline, we know that through literature that the first impact is realized among young children. Infant starts to survive for a longer period of time, or children start to survive and see a number of birthdays. So just to give you one statistics, when the life expectancy in the historical time period used to be roughly around 25 to 30 years, almost 80% of children were not fortunate enough to celebrate their fifth birthday. So that was the extent of mortality in Western societies. This I'm talking before Industrial Revolution, right? So when you think about 80% of people would not survive up to their fifth birthday, and the life expectancy was roughly around 30 years. So there was a huge pressure on human population to do something, create certain social and circumstances so that human society may survive and thrive. And so therefore, we had these cultural things that as soon as you get married, you should have children and multiple childrens, so that if there are like, if you want to have 2, 3, or 4, you need to have 7, 8, or 9, and some of them would survive and some of them may not be so fortunate, right? And we know that for a long period of time in the Western society and even in developing society as well, family building process has largely been understood as something which is God's grace. So depending upon the God wish, people used to have family size or family building. Rather, it was not considered as something that was actually planned, or if you even today, if you go to remote areas and backward areas, or where people have limited education or limited resources, if you talk about to them about family building process and whether you plan your children, whether you think about spacing between children, then very rarely you would come across this notion that people actually think that family is something that can be planned, or if there are any disadvantages or advantages if you properly plan and space
Sir,
between
is this
children.
meeting for the F2 group?
Um,
No,
Aditya,
sorry. Just carry on, please, sir.
yeah.
I think, yeah.
So therefore, for a large period of time in historical time periods, and even today in several developing societies, we still believe that, and evidence suggests, like if you think about Indian context, and if you think about National Family Health Survey, which is a very robust and a continuous source of data to measure the progress on population health and reproductive issues. So one of the questions that is asked is, when you talk to people and ask them, how many children you have, or how many children you have produced. And then there's one question which says that, people say, I mean, sometimes they will not recall, or they say can't say. One of the responses says that up to God. So up to God responses indicate that even, I mean, since 1990 onwards, this proportion has come down. Yet there are sizable proportion of women in the survey who report that, thinking about whether you think about ideal family size. There is one question in NFHS, which is asked to women, and if you go and talk to these women in their lifetime today, suppose if somebody is 30 years of age and she has bear two children. So if you talk to her and you just ask this question, that if you were given suppose you were given a second chance, and if you have to make an assessment of actually how many children you would like to have in your lifetime, what would be that number and what would be the sex composition? So many times when you think about these answers, a lot of women say that that this question actually I mean, I'm not able to answer this question, or maybe many times it's the blessing of the God, and we have nothing to do with thinking about planning or choosing and such things, right? So why I'm talking about these things? So just because a lot of demographic research has gone on this line, that as society progresses, then the fertility and family size and family building tends to move from affairs or issues of governed largely by gods or somebody almighty, and gradually society move, and as the nature of society changes from pre-agrarian towards a modern society, industrial society, where household economic functions change. Like in agriculture society, what happens? You have large farms, you have number of animals, and there is no secure means of livelihood on regular basis. So then what happens largely, it is observed that people believe that family, particularly number of children, are the one of the major resources to have, particularly because it is considered that they provide a lot of economic security. They are productive. Then of course they will provide you security uh, in today's time, and also when the couple would turn older or turn senile over a period of time, they would see these children as means of security, right? Economic security, social security. Many times they're also considered as honor in society. For example, in the South Asian context, particularly, having sons and the preference for sons has been actually considered as very, and mostly in northern India, so to say, having sons or producing sons, a lot of demographic evidence says, is considered as something, for some reason, as a very good thing for the families to have. And this whole idea came from agrarian societies, because if there is any tussle in the family, in the neighborhood, in the village, then probably families can save themselves and look after themselves well if they have more men. I don't want to argue for the sake of this, but I'm just saying that what we know based on evidences, right? Today the things have changed a lot,
May
and
I interrupt,
now
sir?
we know that.
May I
Hello?
interrupt? Sorry.
Yeah,
May I?
sure, sure. Sure.
I think the slides are not moving. So are you moving the slides? Sir?
uh, I'm on slide number 2.
Okay, okay. Yeah, okay, then fine then. Sorry.
That's fine. So, so if you think about, this agrarian societies and notions of how large family size and particularly having son is considered as something which has merit. Why it has considered as merit? Because, as I said, because family do not have a regular source of income, and whatever income is people generate is basically through agriculture fields, looking after animals, and it is seen that having more children is considered as a positive thing. But as society changes, and with time changing, agriculture, I mean, with number of generations coming in, land size reduces, and then gradually it is seen that having large family size no more is considered to be very productive, because of course as mortality is declining, people are now started to seeing the pressure of large family size. And that is what happened actually, if I again take back you to European context. And at the time of Renaissance, uh, what happened was, with mortality started declining in and fertility remaining high, gradually what happens, with mortality coming down and fertility remaining high, suddenly you have the society feeling a lot of pressure to look after many children, from where you would provide them food, where do you provide them education, where do you provide them healthcare, where do you provide them good dress, everything, and managing children also is very demanding. So this has happened in the Western society. It is happening in today's developing society as well, that as mortality is declining, fertility is remaining high. So if you think about demographic transition stage and you go to stage 2, where fertility remains high and mortality is declining rapidly, so that is a time where there is a huge sharp increase in population numbers. Why? Because in different societies, when this mortality starts to decline, everybody doesn't realize this. If now the mortality levels have started to come down, and then we can regulate fertility. No, this will take, which is largely known in demographic literature as, there's a huge time lag between declining mortality and response from fertility. So usually it is about one generation time, which is like 25 to 30 years, and it can vary depending upon the nature of societies which are more equal, with less inequalities, with less differences spatially or socioeconomically, there this time lag may be small. On the other hand, societies which are like more more unequal, there this time lag could be more. So what happens, as I said, with declining mortality, fertility remains high. Suddenly you have so many new children who are just surviving, and then they are being added to the base of the population pyramid. And there is a huge pressure at individual level in the household, that now the family have to negotiate and basically look after so many kids suddenly, which was not the case maybe a generation ago, because automatically 3 4 were unfortunately dying due to high mortality. So when these sort of changes are happening, and I'm talking about these changes when there was no internet, there was no television, there was no radio, and that would take away a relatively longer time, so maybe 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, depending upon different social and cultural circumstances. So therefore, these changes meant that, so the first part of the thing was, I was telling you that society had to create pressure to sustain fertility levels at a level that it is, above mortality, right? So the stress from society was, which we can call as pro-natalist. Why? Because of higher mortality, society had to produce more children so that it can survive and things. And now what happened with declining mortality, with agriculture, then industries, there is an improvement in food supplies, there is improvement in education, health condition, basic hygiene and sanitation. More people are now started to survive, and suddenly there are so many kids who are surviving and living, right? So there is a huge pressure that households have to bear with, which was new, that was not witnessed. So I'm talking about like 2 generation before. If I talk about my grandparents generations or my great grandparents generations, everybody had about 6 7 8 siblings, right, on an average. So if you think about this thing, and then if I talk about my parents generation, then of course there was a difference of 2 to 3 sibling as compared to my grandchildren, my grandparents generation. So that's how it works. So as this mortality started to come down, fertility was high. There was a temporary time period of which varies between different contexts, and it creates a huge pressure on individual. And if you put these individual together at a society level, there is a huge pressure for society to respond about the pressures of high fertility, right? So therefore, this question of how to to think about factors that influence fertility, when this fertility transition happens, and how fertility starts to come down from high to low level. So these are some of the important questions that social scientists, including geographers, demographers, economists, and sociologists have been grappling with for a considerable length of time, right? And so in the first and second stage of demographic transition, you have mostly natural fertility. People have no idea about mostly they have very limited idea about planning families or planning births or spacing between births. And many times, a lot of children are so called undesired, jisko bolte hain unwanted fertility. Why? Because your actual desired level of fertility could be much lower, but because of prevailing high mortality circumstances, people tend to produce more children. And there has been a lot of evidence in India and other countries around us, which clearly shows that if the child is unwanted, or the pregnancy was unwanted, undesired, it has huge implications for the mother, for the kid, and of course for the society. Because if you have if you have significant proportion of unwanted, undesired birth, then there is a problem with providing human capital for those children as well. Every state has a limited resources to invest, and if your population numbers are not in consonance with the capacity of the state to look after those population, then of course, every extra person would mean that everybody would get a slightly lower share of resources. So therefore, even at the policy level and also at household level and family level, everybody has this question of thinking about the implication of higher fertility and how to bring it down. Now, if you think about fertility from a demographic perspective, so actually fertility in a demographic perspective is considered as reproductive performance by men and women, right? So the thing is, like, if you think what is fertility, so fertility actually means how many children men or couple have parented. So that is what in demographic sense fertility actually means. So high fertility society generally means that most parents or most individual will have several children, and low fertility would mean that, of course, couples would have lower number of children, right? And thinking about fertility, we have normally two components. One is the social and one is the biological. Biological is more medical side of fertility, which is beyond our scope of interest. And we largely focus as a social scientist to understand the social economic factors which are associated with fertility and fertility changes. Now, if you think about biological things, demographically speaking, there are two major concepts when you have to think about fertility. One is fecundity, which is actually considered as a physical capacity of couple or individual to reproduce children, right? So basically, couples who have tried, say, for example, 12 months regularly and they want to have a kid, and if they have not been successful in their attempts, then medically they are considered as a group of unfecund, right? Or infertile by physician, the medical persons, and demographically speaking, they are considered as infecund, right? Infecund means that there is a lack of capacity to actually conceive a child, right? So fecundity refers to the physical capacity to reproduce children, and for most of the women, this fecundity is actually considered as the age at onset of first menstruation cycle, and then it peaks during the 20s, and then finally it is largely considered that by the age of menopause, which varies in population between 45 to 49 years of age, or जिसको बोलते हैं at the end of menstruation. So that is the window of reproductive span that different population have and the individual have. And if you think about, what may be the largest fertility in any population group, so there is a tribal and religious community in the US known as Hutterites, which have been recorded to have highest fertility ever in the world, which is roughly around 11 children per woman in their lifetimes. So that is actual population group level fertility measure. So think about, you have roughly 35 years of reproductive span for women in their lives, and then Hutterite, which is a religious tribe in the US, they had on an average 11 children per woman. So if you think about unique example, the most number of children a woman has had in her lifetime is about 67, because she had around 22 pregnancies and number of multiple kids, so she had 67. But again, these are all unique examples. But if you think about at a population level, at a population group, so the actual fertility maximum has been 11 children per woman for Hutterite, which is a tribe community in the US. So now, why that is the case? Because if you think about some of the biological reasons why fertility in many societies have not been able to even match the level of fertility in Hutterites. So there are various reasons for that. And if you think about some of the important reasons, one of them, of course, that pregnancy is always considered as a very there's a huge health risk attached to every pregnancy, and particularly in developing societies. So and we also know that if you think about maternal mortality ratios, that is number of maternal deaths per 100,000 live births, and they have largely remained disproportionately high in developing world countries, and largely because of factors which can easily be managed, but because of basic requirements which are not met. For example, why you have higher maternal deaths in developing countries. Even in case of India also continues to contribute among top three countries for the global maternal deaths. And if you think about the burden of this large chunk of maternal deaths, one of the important indicators that we have addressed recently in the last 10-15 years is institutional deliveries. So in India, culturally, what we have seen that most of the women prefer to deliver their first babies at their maternal place, right? And so therefore there was a cultural this thing, motivation for women to go and deliver it at homes. And culturally it was not considered good to go to a health facility and deliver baby. Largely it used to be such cases which were very critical when women would be taken to a health facility to deliver a baby. But thanks to 2005, government of India introduced this program of National Rural Health Mission, and then later on they came up with this idea of Janani Suraksha Yojana program, where they tried to provide incentive for women and her family. And it was, and basic idea was how to encourage women and come out of this cultural notion that going to health facility and delivering baby in health facilities is normal and it is okay. And then if you see recent NFHS results, in India, the institutional delivery prevalence has improved dramatically, roughly around 30 to 35% in NFHS 3, and now I think it's more than 75 to 80%. So this is one of the most important behavioral changes that India has able to achieve in the last 10-15 years. So therefore, in societies where we still have these cultural taboos or notions or practices that discourage people to access health facilities and deliver babies under medical supervision, wherein people are provided access to regular medical checkups if there is some limitations, for example nutrient deficiencies, then how a state can provide for example different supplements to women during their pregnancy and even after delivering birth. So all of these things are basic health systems requirement, which if they are properly taken care of, then of course pregnancies and deliveries can be made very safe. And that is what we know in the Western societies, where these ratio is in the tune of about 2 to 3 maternal deaths roughly per 100,000 live births. In India, this number has now come down to around 125, 130. But still, if you think where is 2 or 3 maternal death, actually there should not be any maternal death, unfortunately. But if you compare these two societies, and if you, I mean, this is the one of the indicator globally which is most unequal indicator, so to speak. Even if you think about income and other things, health inequality and think about maternal mortality ratio, these are the most unequal measures of health. So therefore, because pregnancies have largely not been very safe, so many cases, even in India today also, a number of states in, for example, Chhattisgarh, in Jharkhand, and even in UP and Bihar, still we have a large of all the maternal death which is reported, most of them come from these states. And because of lack of, you don't have good facilities, there are no good transportation routes. I mean, you can see these images and stories very frequently in newspaper and media, where these things is reported that how difficult it is for women, and many times women deliver babies on the way before reaching health facilities. So these are certain basic things that a country has to work upon and make sure that every pregnancy, every delivery is made safe. So one reason was why other population could not have a level of fertility as high as Hutterite was, because in many population, maternal and pregnancy and childcare has been very risky, and many of these women with frequent experiences of pregnancy with limited spacing between birth would not survive. So she had 1, 2, or 3 baby, and then fourth baby, the body was not prepared enough to take the toll of these frequent deliveries, and hence the woman could not survive, right? So one is this, so that maternal deaths was very high because of medical negligence. Also because in many such societies we have this problem of early marriages. So what does early marriages mean? That if you see, there's a lot of research which says teenage pregnancy, early marriages, adolescents pregnancy would have additional risk for both mother and kids, and they will also have risk for poor nutrition. So the net result is that again, the poor kid and mother would not survive largely. In case of India also, I mean, we still have a significant proportion of women who are married early and then start their childbearing soon. Also culturally, if you see in Indian context, and particularly I'm talking about the northern India. So what we have is that after marriage, a female, the newlywed women have to move to the in-laws family, and when she goes to this new family, and most of these marriages are exogamous, so not in the same village or same relationships. They are actually done at distinct places with families which largely are unknown to them. So there is a cultural pressure on the women to secure and cement her position in the new marriage and in the new household. And one of the way to gain a status in the family is to have child as early as possible, and preferably if she has a son, then of course her marriage life, her family life, socially speaking, is considered to be more regular, and she acquires a good status in family. So that is also part of the reason why in the northern states, and we continue to have problem with higher fertility, and because of gender issues involved, gender dynamics is such. And I will talk about these things in part of the work that we have done in UP with very interesting findings. So therefore, what happens when these girls are newly, and you also know that early marriages is something which is attached with society, with economically and socially deprived population, right? So if the parents are poor and they have limited capacity, so they would of course look forward to get these girls get married early. And also there are problems with regard to the security related problems. In recently I was giving one lecture in other university, and one of the girls asked a very interesting question to me, and which was, sir, is there any relationship between gender based violence and fertility? Which I thought is a very good, is a very serious issue. I have not come across a study which has. I will actually look and think about this, but it's very pertinent to think about in the Indian context, and particularly in the North Indian context, about different sort of gender discrimination, child sex ratios, distorted. We know about female feticides, violence against women in the family, in public places, and there's a lot of discrimination, unfortunately. And if you think about why people think about having sons or not having daughters, there cannot be any logical explanation, and there should not be. But somewhere some way or the other, yes, maybe some of you who are doing research as a student can think about this question, that how these kind of circumstances in the community where people are living probably shape their views about children, and which, if they want to prefer or they don't want to prefer. Ideally, one should not have any cost and benefit about sons and daughter, because both of them are equally lovable and good enough. But this is something which need to be discussed and worked upon. So this is for all the students to think about. Now, fecundity also varies with access to the kind of food and care that women get. And most of the society, like, again, there is a gender issue here comes, that if you think about Indian society, largely, when the food is served, largely the men first go take the first shot, then of course the sons, and then the daughters, and finally the lady who is the probably wife, or maybe daughter-in-law would get the last chance. And in most of these rural backgrounds where limited resources, whatever leftover is there, she would consume without any complaint. So again, that also has a lot of impact on her capacity to bear kids and become fecund and have children. And so therefore, so these are some of the other reasons that poor nutrition and also care and gender dynamics are things which influence the woman's capacity to conceive and produce children. So these are some of the reasons, and therefore poor nutrition is also related with amenorrhea, which is temporary suppression of menstruation among women, and that is linkage with the kind of diet that she gets and the care at the time of pregnancy and delivery. So all these things influence the biological capacity among women and couple, and similarly among men too. Most of these, unfortunately, discourses is restricted on women, because most of the way demography work is that the data is largely collected from the perspective, at least in the developing countries context, from women. We are also, Indian government, DHS provides some data on men and their preferences and how many children they have fathered, but yet demography is more unequal towards women's side. So we don't have much understanding about how men's fertility, and we know that fertile time among men is relatively high, but there are problems, and there are very few studies that look at how men's fertility or infertility can be one of the factor that can influence population level fertility. And thinking about natural fertility, so basically natural fertility is that when people have no idea about deliberately controlling fertility, so then the net result is the natural fertility, when people or couples do not want to plan or regulate through any means to restrict the size of family or to space. So all that is part of natural fertility, and therefore most of the traditional society continue to have natural fertility. They do not use any artificial means to limit or to space between birth. This is just one example of the comparison between. So this block is the age profile of fertility patterns from Hutterite, and this is a comparative between different other countries, and you can clearly see, if you have a natural fertility, this sort of plot was observed. So it started with 15 to 19, goes peak into early 20s, and gradually goes down till 49 age of menstruation, and the difference is huge. So depending upon different context, and there are a lot of differences which there, for example, what is the age of marriage, whether people are using contraception. There are different theoretical framework also provided that try to help us understand these differences. Thinking about another component which we as a social scientists or demographers are more interested to understand is the social component that governs fertility pattern and change. So as I said, in agrarian society with relatively higher level of mortality and standard of living, or material circumstances of family is very poor, so there having large family size, that is number of children, is considered to be advantageous for, as I said, number of reasons. They provide you more income in the short run. They're also considered as somebody who would provide you social security in the present time, and also when you would become older. And of course, in most of these agrarian societies, the role of the state is also quite limited, in the sense that you do not have a good quality social safety programs, and therefore and in the Indian context, family has been very important traditionally speaking, and we have had a large extended family systems. So whatever problem that used to happen, any kind of shock in the family, chahe economic ho, chahe health ho, chahe if the family is the ultimate resources most of the time. So therefore in agrarian society, large families have been traditionally preferred. But as the nature of society transformed from agriculture to industrial, and with declining mortality, and there's a pressure on societies, and couples and individuals wants to experience social mobility, wants to go up, improve their material circumstances, want to exploit opportunities, and experience financial freedom and independence. Then of course, then family size and extended families, people have to make choices, they have to make trade-offs, and in those circumstances people find smaller families to be more better option. uh yeah, this I think I've discussed. Yeah, thinking about children as security, and of course they provide you income in the short run, and security in the long run. And the status of women in society has been also a very significant factor why we had a higher fertility in many traditional societies. So as I said, son preference is something which is not going away. Even like countries such as India, Korea, China, many Asian countries still have this menace of son preference, if I may call that. And if you look at the recent census, the last census actually, 2011, shows that a state such as Maharashtra, which is on an aggregate level looks like to be a very economically and socially progressive state, has witnessed one of the huge drop in child sex ratios. So if you think about with improvement in material circumstances, people would become more egalitarian, their views would change. So a lot of studies says that urban people living in urban areas with better education, good lifestyle and everything, so they have all the means, right, to implement what is their attitude or what is their value system. So if, and there's a very famous study by late Professor Mari Bhatt, who have also done a research and reported that how with declining fertility in India, sex ratio has become more distorted, this accentuated preferences for son has become, people have been able to implement it more successfully with improving material life circumstances. So it is one of the very significant challenge which probably can only be dealt with changing the education system. Maybe value education needs to change. And I mean, we need to realize that, having a son or a daughter should not make any difference to. But unfortunately, with all this discussion, we still have evidences which says that prosperous states, villages, chahe city hai, urban areas hai, couples still view having son as something that they prefer. And there is a lot of research that talks about, uh, you know, stopping rule, right? So the first child happens to be a son, they would stop. If the first child happens to be a daughter, they would try to go for the second child. If the second child happens to be again a daughter, they would still go for the third child, right? So, I mean, a lot of studies are of this nature has been done to think about, how people are actually planning their families. So this is an open area for research, and there is still a very limited proportion of families where if the first child was a daughter and people have limited their families through sterilization or any other things, right? So there's a lot of good data, and probably we have to think about. So I think that the question which one of the students asked me the last time was, how violence and discrimination probably could be one of the reasons why people do not want to give birth to daughter. I don't know, but this can be investigated. So basically, we need to create society and circumstances where it should not matter whether somebody is a boy or girl, or we should create a more secure spaces so that people feel comfortable to give birth irrespective of the sex of the child. Even though we have the PNDT Act that actually makes it an illegal offense, I mean legal offense to find out the sex of the fetus and go for abortion. But having said that, there has been a lot of studies which says that people are misusing, and there has been I mean, of course, the instances in case of Maharashtra says that this rule has been widely misused and need to be properly amended. And therefore, we also need to create greater opportunities. I mean, in traditional society, where status of women is not same as men. Of course, in not any society, even globally also, it's not like developing society only we have this problem of status of men and women different. Even in case of Western societies, a lot of studies says that if you think about number of time that people engage in household chores, which is considered economically not that rewarding, a lot of men, even in the Western societies, spend very less time as compared to women or wives in terms of household chores or looking after children. So these sort of are some of the, from their perspective, because context is different, so indicator is different. I mean, recently India also, National Sample Survey, they have collected a very useful data about the time used and time spent between men and women. And if you can analyze that data, that can easily tell you, where men are spending time. So most of the men, I don't know how they're spending time, but hopefully they're spending a lot of time in economically productive activity also and leisure activity also. But in case of women, majority of the time they devote into taking care of children, families, caregiving jobs, which are very, very important jobs, but disproportionately more this responsibility is on the shoulder of women. Now, there is a very noted demographer. His name is Ainsley J. Cole, and he's done a very important work, Princeton Fertility Project in early 80s, and came up with this understanding that if you have to think about fertility decline. Hello? Aditya, you want to say something?
No. There was somebody else. So
Okay.
you could carry on, please.
Yeah. So Ainsley J. Cole came with these three very important ideas if you have to think about fertility decline, which is quite relevant, and a lot of people now are thinking on this line to explain fertility differences. So the first point that he mentioned was that, this is the acronym he says is ready, willing, and able, So acceptance of fertility as a choice. So couples should be able to see fertility as a matter of choice, whether they want to have kid or they do not want to have kid. Second, if they want to have kid, then how many, how regularly, whether they want to say space between them or not. So until and unless this first condition is not met, the second thing doesn't come. I mean, if we consider as fertility is a matter of choice, good, then the second question comes, whether reducing fertility is advantageous as a couple for me or not. right? And if I think, well, it makes sense because I we have number of opportunities. I have to make trade-off between opportunities and looking after kids. Kids are lovable, they are lovely, provide a lot of comfort, soothing experience, fun, take away a lot of stress from life. But then again, I have to think about how many kids I want to have. So I have to make a trade-off between, producing number of kids versus few kids, and I look for other things also in life. And so if the second rule also I accept as a couple or as an individual, then third opportunity comes. Question is whether I have knowledge and I have if mastery over techniques, or I know where these options are available, where actually I can implement my fertility goals into reality. So these are three very important and compelling questions, or conditions, preconditions that was proposed by Ainsley J. Cole to understand and explain fertility differentials in different societies. So if couple do not consider fertility as a matter of choice, rather it is something which is beyond their control, then of course second and third will not come, right? But if you think that fertility is something which is a matter of choice, like many couples nowadays in India and in many other countries, they don't want to, they don't want to plan families. Basically they don't want to have kids, which in Indian context is still something which is very difficult to imagine and think about whether it is normal or not. But in Western context, like I know a few couples in Western context where they believe that even having no kid is also a matter of choice, and there's nothing wrong with that. So different contexts, different customs and tradition have different views, and therefore, but in Indian context or in developing context, if you think about this thing, so it's about we can plan families, we can decide when to get married, when to have kids, depending upon our life trajectory, our goals. And accordingly, you all know through a lot of media that for example, celebrities in the country, they plan their kids mostly after 35 or 40, and then they can store their most fertile eggs, and they will have conception and births whenever they need. Now of course, surrogacy in India has also become legal, and there are of course terms and conditions when to go for surrogacies. So there are a lot of ways through which people ways and means and options when to have, how many to have, and how to have kids. So the life is presented to us with many choices and many options, but for majority of people in the country, this is still a very big question whether fertility is actually a matter of choices. Because when you think about fertility, and if I can talk about my experiences from a village study in the Indian context, particularly in the northern India, it's not actually the case. Why? Because often there are a lot of pressure on newly married women to have a child, and the pressure is from both sides, from her in-law side and also from her maternal side. And of course husbands also tend to prefer more kids. So there are a lot of evidences, and rarely we don't know actually whether the final say on the number of babies, when to have and not to have, how frequently to have, son or daughter, to what extent is actually the say of wife matters or not matters. So these are all important questions for us to remember when you think about fertility change, fertility decline. It should be a matter of choice for the couples to decide. So there has to be a good communication between male and female, husband and wife, to think about these things. Why? Because once you have a kid, life changes a great deal. There are very different responsibility comes in life, priority changes, and when you have second kid, you have third kid, you have fourth kid, so the life circumstances change a lot, and these changes doesn't only work at individual level. If you aggregate this individual or couple level behavior at societal level, then of course it has repercussion on society too, right? So as India is moving forward, as world is changing, gradually we are seeing a secular change across world. If you look at the PRB data sets which is published every year, they show that global total fertility levels are coming down. People preferences for families, number of children is going down, and we don't know whether it is a very positive change, or one should be very alarmed about it. Everybody is, this is a question which is open for everyone to make a decision whether it's a good change or a bad change. But a lot of research says that when people are looking after to make so material and social advancement in their life, they have to make a trade-off. There are a lot of economists who have done research on this side. For example, Levenstein theories is there. Then you have demand and supply framework of fertility by Rubenstein, I think, and from Easterling's framework of demand supply of fertility. They also talk about these things. That there is first, if you think about Easterlin framework of fertility, of course you can study that. So it talks about first the supply of children. So suppose if somebody says that I want to have 2 kids, so fertility would continue to increase as a supply side till it is meeting my choice, which is I want to have 2 kids, suppose. And once that level is achieved, then either fertility can continue to increase, remain at that level, or it can come down. So if it meets with the demand of the society, then society has to make a call whether they want to restrict number of children afterwards, or they don't want to do anything, right? So अगर आप इसको कोल के framework से देखें, so if it is considered as a matter of choice and people view that fertility regulation is something which provides you more opportunity in life, you can invest your limited time into something which is more productive, rewarding, along with, of course, you are taking care of kid, which your desired family sizes you have already achieved. So the question comes that if you think it is advantageous, whether you have a capacity to implement your attitude and your desired family into reality. So that can be done only when you have idea, if you have information, and also you should have means to implement, which is known as cost of fertility regulation. So the cost is, of course, the monetary cost. At the same time, the opportunity cost that couple have to bear, because what is the net cost of thinking about an additional child? There is, of course, a lot of money involved. There's a lot of health related problems. There are a lot of opportunities which both husband and wife have to forego. So all these permutations and combinations goes into this decision of uh, when to marry, when to have kids, how many kids. And there's a lot of research which again shows that if you properly do not space between birth, then there's a huge risk on the nutrition and health, cognition, and everything between children. So therefore it is a very important thing for individual, and it's not only important for individual couples only. When this behavior we aggregate it up at societal level, it makes a huge cost for families, societies, and for nations to bear with. So now I want to just go to some of the work. So in terms of implication or consequences, so we know that declining fertility has huge benefits for women, for kids, for families. In the sense that if women tend to marry late, they can invest their lot of time into education, training, and skill building, and a lot of time they can then find better livelihood opportunity, jobs. They can make a good and secure career. And if there's a lot of knowledge out there which says that if you want to actually bring change in society, the best thing is to educate women in the society, because they not only would help themselves, their kids, their families, but society in general would become more egalitarian and more sustainable in the long run. There's a lot of research which says that organizations, companies that exhibit or implement the idea of diversity in their workplace. So when you think about diversity, including women and gender differences is also one important part of it. So organizations which actually have these diversified policies providing access to everybody in the society to be part of the workforce, they perform much better than organizations wherein you have a preponderance of one population group at large. So therefore, when we bring down the fertility levels, women have more years of opportunity to spend more years into education, schools, colleges, universities, skill building, training, expressions, leadership roles. Of course, they can spend more time in their reproductive lifespan actually into productive work, which is looking after livelihood opportunities, job opportunities, and other things in life too. Not only necessarily spending entire life looking after and caring family, which is of course very important, and there is no doubt about it. But I mean, there's a lot of question that comes that why only women have to disproportionately bear the responsibility. Why can't men also share equal burden? And I think last 2 years of COVID-19 has taught many difficult lessons, but important lessons. And one of the lessons is that probably men have got an opportunity to understand to a great deal that how valuable it is to manage household chores, looking family material affairs. And so hopefully I mean, the research needs to be done 5 year, 10 year down the line, whether men have remained the same or their attitude too has changed with regard to shouldering equal responsibility along with women in the household. So briefly, I think I am running out of my time, but I will take a few minutes to talk about our study in Jaunpur. So we were looking at as an important factor of fertility preferences and behavior, social networks, which is nothing but among other resources. We know that social connectedness, social basically friends in life matter, right? So in rural village, sorry, in rural India, in Uttar Pradesh, what we found was that there is a huge stigma, there is a lot of discrimination and limited opportunity for women to exercise their attitudes, their preferences, their views with regard to family choices. So or also family regulations. So one of the alternative is that if they have access to somebody who is close to them, whom they trust, whom they think they are like us in many circumstances, and if they can share their experiences with them, others person can also share experiences, provide information, knowledge, support, and everything. So whether that matters or not. So basically this study was looking at whether women who were living with their mother-in-laws, to what extent that was determining access to social networks, that is number of peers that women, young women, married women had in their families. And our study indicates that on an average, married young women in rural Uttar Pradesh tend to have smaller number of close peers as compared to women who were not living with their mother-in-laws. So why that is important? It is important because, and of course, we also looked at heterogeneity. Suppose if mother-in-laws prefer larger number of family for her daughter-in-law than daughter-in-law herself, then these effects were more stronger. Similarly, if mother-in-law does not approve family planning for her daughter-in-law, then again these effects were very strong. That is, average number of close peers were very limited for the mother-in-law in those circumstances when she was living with the mother-in-law. And then why that is important? Because if you have a relatively large number of or significant number of close peers, that allows these women to access you know healthcare facilities. We do not find any significant impact on use of modern contraception and other things, but we observe that close number of peers in villages for the women was very useful strategy for them if they wanted to visit health facility and family planning clinic in our case. And of course, if she could many times in rural areas it's very difficult for women to go on her own. Sometime she has to go with mother-in-laws, with husband. But suppose if she doesn't want to go with any one of them and she want to go with somebody else, if there is no somebody else, probably she would not go. In that case, if she has somebody with her to go with her, somebody like her, then she is more likely to visit this health facility. So therefore, women's access to health facility, particularly for family planning related issues, if she has these other person which is social network, then they are very helpful. But it depends. If the mother-in-law doesn't want, if she wants more kids, she doesn't approve to regulate fertility. In that cases, she has a lot of say in the household to regulate with whom she is talking, meeting or not meeting. So therefore, so basically saying that, as I said, if fertility and family planning are not a matter of choice for couple and individual women, then there is a lot of things that needs to be looked at societal level. We need to find out ways in which we can empower women so that they of course discuss with their husbands and decide together when, where and how many and kids they want to have, and so that they have a good and healthy family, which means that we have a good and healthy society as a whole. So I want to now finish this thing here, and I would take, if you have anything to ask, please go ahead. Thank you so much.
So thank you, sir, for a very insightful and enlightening lecture. We have some questions from our audience. The first one is from Sarfaraz Ashgar. He says the government of India is in the process of enhancing the age of marriage from 18 to 21. Does this age enhancement is directly correlated to fertility mortality, or it is more concerned with women's empowerment?
Okay. Well, my view is that, of course, based on demographic evidences that we have, which says that early marriages means that there are limited time for women to invest into education and human capital. There's a huge burden on women health because of teenage pregnancies, and of course, there is a huge impact on the health of kids. So, I mean, this is yet very debatable, and it's very difficult for right now to actually conclude whether it's very good. And I think we need to devote more with data on these questions. But I mean, largely, if you see based on data, already women are, with education, this age at marriage is rising. Okay, so even if government doesn't implement this regulation, still we are doing the same thing. Gradually, if you look at the data in the last 3-4 rounds of NFHS, age at marriage is rising, age at first birth is rising. So already society is on that trajectory. So probably, if they implement this regulation, how much material difference is going to bring on the ground is something else. But we are going on the same track, even if this regulation is not implemented. And I see this change as a welcome change, because if you have greater parity, gender parity in society, society will benefit, of course.
Another question is, apart from socio-cultural factors that you mentioned, which are the other factors that play a role or have an effect on the fertility transition? I think this has been discussed already, right, sir?
Mm-hmm.
Or
So
you?
yeah, I mean there are different frameworks. Like I did not mention about Bongard's framework of this thing, biological determinants. So basically, there are four factors which Bongard has proposed that explain about 90% of variation in fertility between societies. So proportion married population, proportion using any means of contraception, this proportion breastfeeding, and postpartum amenorrhea. So these four factors explain roughly about 80 to 19% differentials in fertility in different contexts. And beyond it is what we have discussed otherwise, So, I mean, gender issues are important, son preference is critical, female education is very important. Uh, so these are a constellation of factors, and it depends on different context, right?
So another question is, according to NFHS data, females surpassed males in terms of sex ratio. Sir, my question is, how is it going to affect fertility transition in future?
I mean, female surpassed male in terms of sex ratio. I mean, I'm not sure. So basically, traditional knowledge is that we have normally the sex ratio should be like 105 girls per 100 boys. And in many societies in Asian context, we see that this number has been distorted, biased against female as high as 130 boys per 100 girls. So and these differences have become even more accentuated with declining fertility, right? So therefore there is a huge need. So this program of this beti padhao and beti bachao program, and these, I mean, increasing age at marriages, and all these programs are basically to improve the value of daughter and women, greater respect and visibility in society. So I am not sure with your question properly, but I think data indicates that there is a need for a lot of proactive action to improve prospect for girls to be born and to grow as a healthy Indian.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Then another question is, could you kindly enlighten me how childlessness has influenced fertility transition in India, and why there is low spatial correlation of childlessness in northern western states, like high correlation of the same in the southern states of India?
Yeah, so thank you. I think this we have done some research on this question. So yeah, I mean, based on evidence that we have analyzed, we have found that particularly in the southern parts of India where the prevalence of childlessness is relatively high, we observe that fertility levels are of course high. I mean, everybody knows the South India, most of the states and districts have already achieved replacement level fertility, right? That is what is we understand. In terms of factors that might lead to childlessness, well, there are a variety of factors which may work. In most of the southern states, people are living, I mean, they are predominantly working in urban areas, cities, and you know that city lifestyle bring about a lot of pressure in your life for both men and women. They have, if you look at the working style of people in cities and towns, so, and what they eat, when they sleep, when they go to work, I mean, 24/7 regime is very different for people, right? And one of the major issues with this is the stress in life is so huge, right? So with insecurity increasing, with relationships, there are a lot of issues. And so because of the complicatedness of life, and probably it has some association with the rising childlessness, one thing. And second thing, of course, we are also probably India is also experiencing where some couples are but voluntarily not going for kids themselves. So that is also a new recent trend which has started. And so that is also probably some part goes to that too.
So next question is again related to the sex ratio data that we have received from NFHS 5. And he's asking, Ankit Gupta is asking, this is for the first time we are seeing this type of tremendous change in female population. What is the main reason behind this change?
So let me say very frankly that this is a preliminary data from NFHS, mere fact sheets, which are of course open for modification. This is not the final data. So I would say that we need to wait till the final report comes. Then it will be better to make any reasonable comment, because only few states and fact sheets. I think they are still there will be huge number of rounds of churning and modification. So it's very preliminary, and it not be very good to make any conclusive statement based on these results.
And I would like to add something to this, because this is a survey, National Family Health Survey. It's a very reputed one and national representative and everything. But I think when we're looking at sex ratio, we're trying to say something about the country's sex ratio. We should go for country's census rather than different surveys that happen, because the survey has not been what you call conducted only for calculating sex ratio. It has taken into consideration so many other things, so it's better to wait for the census to come and then comment on it.
Bilkul. Absolutely correct. So, the gold standard thing is the census data, which can give you the actual picture. Surveys have, as Dr. Aditya is also saying, has number of other things to do. They are not primarily focused on measuring the child sex thing. So this is a problem. That's true. But again, we have to wait till the final report comes.
Next question is from Mahashweta Chakrabarti. Good afternoon, sir. If fertility has a positive correlation with nutritional status of a region, then why fertility rate is higher in poor areas? And there is another one. I want to know the idea and need of national transfer account, and if it has any impact on fertility rate.
So thank you for this question. Actually, the point I was trying to make was with regard to fecundity, the biological capacity to conceive and bring out a, live birth. So in societies where we have good nutritional status, this capacity is there, and otherwise you have infecundity in those societies. So fertility is different. Actually, fertility is the actual performance, whether couple is actually able to produce a live birth or not. So these are two different things. With regard to national transfer accounts, I'm sorry, I have no idea because I've never worked on NTA, so I will not be able to make any comment. Maybe economists or people who have economic demographic perspective would give you more light. I can give you one reference, Professor Leshram Ladu Singh, former professor at IIPS. He has done some publication and he is very good with NTA. So if you want to actually pursue, you can write to him. He will be able to guide you well.
One more from Ditish Mitra Goswami. Since independence, India's population policies are not strictly applicable, and there is a hook and line and sinker absence of population policies at all. What kind of measures should we adopt to manage such loopholes in such policies?
Well, as you know that, health and population has largely remained a state subject in Indian context, which is rightly so because different states have different situations, problems, and priorities. So we have had these national policies, and our national policies have been very, flexible and very ideal to say so, because very different states, for example, northern states have a very different level of development and different challenges. Southern states have different challenges. So having a very uniform policy for a country as a whole would actually invite a lot of problems. So therefore, we have had the state policies about population, and if you see, majority of Indian states have actually able to achieve a replacement level fertility, except most of the EAG empowered action group states. And of course, if you think about population policies, basically it's a multi-sectoral affair, right? So population policy would invite Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Women and Child Development, Rural Development. So all these ministry have to work together because all these indicator influence population variables. So I think that, we are, as a country, given our diversity and our size, Probably we are on the right track. And as you know, from recent NFHS 5 again, which is preliminary, which says that we have achieved replacement level for a country as a whole. But you know that in India, more than 140 districts, still the fertility level is in the range of 4 to 5 children per woman. So, and therefore, this program of aspirational districts in India is introduced just to bring more enthusiasm among administration, and probably to target these major areas where we can work more on education, health, and well-being, so that their circumstances maybe improve, and automatically then couples will make right choices for themselves.
Another question is, fertility transition may lead to gender equality.
Well, that is a very good question. The whole idea is the same, because we expect that fertility transition means basically, I mean, when couple decide, it is a matter of choice and smaller family size are helpful for us, then we are going in the right direction. But evidences that we have, like I said, a paper by Professor Mari, but clearly shows declining fertility. People want to have one kid, and means probably they would like to prefer son over daughter. If these sort of attitude and behavior persist, then I'm not sure if actually we are going towards gender equity, right? But generally speaking, one would expect the same.
I would like to add a few things here. For example, you have Iran. So Iran had a very quick fertility transition. Within like 20 years, they reached the replacement level fertility, the TFR of 2.1. But then if you look at the gender equality there, they are probably the most gender unequal country in the world.
Yeah, yeah,
And so gender equality depends on a lot of things. It's not just fertility transition.
bilkul. Very true.
Next is okay. Should something like paternity leaves be implemented to improve
I
social?
wish, I wish, and I pray the day when India do that. But otherwise, India is very democratic, and I think that India has been very forward in terms of giving leave, particularly for maternity. And I think we are the only country which gives the maximum leave for women related to maternity affairs, so which is a very welcome thing to do. But I'm sure gradually people will realize that if gender equity has to be ensured, men must also get opportunity to bear equal responsibility. So I would welcome if we, as a country, does do these things. I will very welcome these changes.
How can we use this idea of fertility, probably fertility transition, to solve resource sustainability?
Hmm. So, see, this is a very complicated thing. On population level, if every family has fewer children, which means that you have fewer people. Basically, it's about consumption patterns. In West, you see, even if people have very fewer children, yet per person consumption pattern is such that on an average they consume more than 60-70 times what an average person in global South is consuming, right? And there is also a lot of research which says that with disintegrating families, more number of nuclear families, the per capita consumption of different types of resources is actually rising, correct? So just having this fertility decline, expecting that resources availability would become more sustainable or more equitable, is probably a different thing. I'm teaching one course on sustainable development here at Jamia, and many times in our classroom discussion this thing comes, where ultimately we think about the Gandhian philosophy of there is enough for everyone's need but not enough for everyone's greed. So if we become a responsible citizen, we try to do small things to save resources, whatever we can do. I think that is the only way possible, right? That is what I can say.
Okay, sir. One more question is from Priyanka Das. She says that there was a step taken by the state of Rajasthan to register the marriages, which were illegal marriages in the sense that they were conducted before 18 years of age.
Yeah.
And so her question is whether this is encouraging the early marriages, or it is going to fill the data gap.
Yeah, I think this policy was introduced and probably it was rolled back too, if I'm not correct. So, and there was a huge criticism because, if there's something very illegal, I think collecting data is fine, but legalizing that is probably problematic, right? So therefore, people said that, it is encouraging child marriages. So therefore, it was withdrawn.
state interference is it justified? State interference in fertility determinism through population control bill, is it justified?
Well, see, every government in the world has a responsibility to make sure that you have a welfare state, right? And so, therefore, whether it is mortality, whether it is fertility, whether it is migration, whether it is marriage, I mean, government are within their rights to ensure that, people have a good life. But again, there is a limit up to which the state can intervene or intrude, right? So, therefore, India is also signatory to ICPD, which says that, we guarantee people opportunities to make choices with regard to their reproductive goals. And our duty and responsibility is to inculcate capacity so that they will be able to realize their goals. And that is what is the government of India's official stand. And despite everything that has been going on around, government of India's stance is still stand the same. है ना? So that is what government of India is saying. That is for the couples to decide when, how frequently, and how many kids they want to have.
One last question, sir, and it's from Raj Tripathi. He asks, which one is more affecting the fertility level, genetic factors or socioeconomic factors? Then there is another question, is it still relevant to impose strict contraceptive laws or provide incentives for less births in India, though India reported decline in TFR recently?
So I think for the first question, I can say that it depends on context. I mean, of course, biological factors have a very huge role to play, and social factors are also relevant, and they will continue to remain relevant in different contexts, right? To what extent they actually matter needs to be quantified, and of course, people can do that. For the second question, whether what is the role of the state, right? Second part.
Is it relevant to impose strict contraceptive laws or provide incentives for less births, despite the fact that we have reached
Yeah.
the replacement?
Okay. So as far as if you think about strict laws, I don't know actually what you mean, but of course we can give incentives, and we have been giving incentive to people for smaller family size, and there have been number such policies by government of India and different state governments from for number of years now. Different opportunities in terms of allowances for promotions, and of course reserving seats if you have a number of children or more than that. So we already have them, and probably that has also worked in India's favor, because we have also received or seen a very drastic fertility change in the last couple of decades, so which has been very helpful. So strict laws, I really don't know what you mean by that, but we need something to help people to we need all kind of things. You need IC activities, you need development activities, you need encouragements. Variety of things need to go to see that this fertility level come down, because at the end of the day it is good for the couple themselves, for their families, and the state as a whole.
Two more questions just came. I think
Sure,
we should
sure.
take them. Yeah. And, is changing lifestyle is also affecting the fecundity?
Of course, yes. I think that earlier question about childlessness, I tried to say this thing, that with changing lifestyle, particularly urban way of life, with increasing uncertainty, complexity, and changing normal, in traditional, I mean, in Indian culture and systems, we say that early to rise and go to bed also early so that is good for our self health and digestive system and all. But in modern world, it has completely become topsy turvy, एकदम opposite हो गया है. So जब हमको सोने को जाना होता है, we wake up, and जब wake up होना होता है सोने को जाते हैं. So that has a huge impact on, therefore even men's infertility is also very much increasing and rising.
In a poor country like India, where a large part of population is poor and uneducated, to what extent would it be right to increase the age of marriage? Because even today, poor people in India want to marry their girls as soon as possible. Sir, will this not encourage illegal marriage? Is raising the age of marriage the only way to empower women?
As I said in, I think, a related question a little earlier, that India is already witnessing a huge change or a huge jump in the age at marriage. The age at marriage, both for men and women, are already increasing for the last 20 years. Even if you will not have this regulation, we are very much moving on the same direction. So I'm not sure. Yeah, of course, you are correct that those who are economically poor or those who have limited education, what happens to those areas and those regions. So as I said, this question, this is very much open to debate and very difficult to conclude. Nobody knows, there is no science to suggest this will only work positively or this will only work negatively. So if there is any regulation which is implemented and we feel that, the results are not as we expected, we can always modify or maybe we can roll back. So always those options are open. That nothing is permanent in democracy.
Yeah, so we don't have any questions anymore. So thank you, sir, very much for accepting our invitation and delivering such a nice lecture, informative, very what do you call, enlightening to us. And I hope that all of us here in the audience must have benefited from the very intensive discussion and all the questions. I thank you all for the questions that you asked, very interesting questions. And it was a very, what do you call, productive session. And thank you, sir. Thank you very much for coming. And
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Aditya, for this
have a
wonderful
good evening.
opportunity. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to see the reaction from the audience, which is actually making me comfortable to know that, people have interest in the area. And I hope that they would also continue working, because very fascinating and very interesting, rich area to work. And at the same time, I can also see a lot of familiar faces. And I want to say, give my regards to Dr. Kilina Tiwari, Dr. Meeta Bhabiji, and everyone. So thank you so much, and wonderful to be here. And if there is any chance for me to be back, I will be always happy to be back.
Sure, sir. We expect that you'll be here in the future as well. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you all, and namaskar. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Namaskar, Bhai Sahab. Thank you.